To torture or not to torture?
This government does not torture people.
That's right. Enhanced interrogation techniques is what he called it. But all that torture is in the past now, right? No one wants to bring it back, do they?
I would absolutely authorize something beyond waterboarding, and believe me, it'll be effective.
And you know what? If it doesn't work, they deserve it anyway for what they're doing.
Oh. But hold on, Mr. President. What if torture is what helped lead them to do all those awful things in the first place? What if torture, regardless of whether or not it works, causes blowback? Did you know that many of the so-called giants of jihad, the men who either came up with the ideology behind groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, or actually led Al-Qaeda and ISIS, were victims of torture? The father of modern Islamist extremism, for example, is considered by many to be the Egyptian writer and Muslim Brotherhood leader Sayyid Qutb, who ended up being brutally tortured in an Egyptian prison after the Brotherhood tried and failed to assassinate then Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser in 1954. And the result of that torture? Well, as Lawrence Wright, one of the world's leading experts on Al-Qaeda, has written, human rights advocates in Cairo argue that torture created an appetite for revenge, first in Sayyid Qutb and later in his acolytes. The main target of their wrath was the secular Egyptian government, but a powerful current of anger was directed towards the West, which they saw as an enabling force behind the repressive regime. It was Qutb's imprisonment and torture, agrees The Economist magazine, that turned him into an impassioned and embittered revolutionary and an ideological godfather to Osama bin Laden. Now, bin Laden may not have been a victim of torture, but his deputy Ayman al-Zawahiri, the current leader of Al-Qaeda, was also tortured in an Egyptian prison, this time in the 1980s, and it seems he too was radicalized by that experience, as were his fellow Islamist comrades behind bars.
We tried our best to establish this Islamic State and Islamic society.
The torture that they endured, in my opinion, is what really gave them an appetite for revenge. And the bloodletting that is so characteristic of Al-Qaeda, I think it was born in the humiliation that those men felt in those Egyptian prisons.
In more recent years, there's also Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who went into prison in Jordan in the 1990s as a violent thug and came out of prison a violent radical and extremist and future leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. His biographer, who spent time with him in prison, says that incarceration and the severe torture Zarqawi endured was, quote, the most significant phase in the development of his personality. Oh dear. Good job, torturers. Now, no one's saying that Zawahiri or Zarqawi weren't bad men before they were tortured, or that torture made them bad men. But to pretend that the vicious abuse they did endure, they used dogs on Zawahiri, for example, while Zarqawi lost his toenails, to pretend that had no impact on their worldview, their hatred, their anger, their desire for vengeance, is just naive. Now, you might say, well, regardless, that's all ancient history. What's that got to do with today and with US policy today? Well, here's the thing. Torture causes blowback, and torture is an unintended recruiting sergeant for terrorist groups, not just in the direct sense, you get tortured, you want revenge, but in an indirect way too. You may not have been tortured yourself, but you're willing to join up with a terror group to protest the torture you've seen or heard about. Here's what Philip Sands, the UK lawyer and torture expert, told the US Congress about the British experience with torture and with the IRA in Northern Ireland.
The view is taken in the United Kingdom that it extended the conflict with the IRA probably by between 15 and 20 years. Because what it did was that it outraged the community that was associated with those who were subject to these particular techniques, and it created a breeding ground, a recruiting ground.
Yet the US still went ahead and did the same kind of torture in Abu Ghraib, Guantánamo Bay, CIA black sites across the world, the same kind of torture that the British did in Northern Ireland. And there was the same kind of blowback. For example, Sharif Kouachi, one of the French brothers who carried out the horrific attack on the offices of Charlie Hebdo in Paris, said it was, quote, everything I saw on the television, the torture at Abu Ghraib prison, all that which motivated me. And it wasn't just Kouachi. A State Department memo leaked by WikiLeaks noted how following publication of the first Abu Ghraib photos, Saudi authorities arrested 250 individuals trying to leave Saudi Arabia to join extremist groups in Afghanistan. 250! Now, you might be thinking Abu Ghraib was closed in 2006. That was over 10 years ago. But that's exactly the problem. We're still feeling the blowback from that torture. It's the gift that keeps giving to the terrorists. And you don't have to take just my word for it.
Abu Ghraib and other situations like that are non-biodegradables. They don't go away. The enemy continues to beat you with them like a stick.
And of course, it isn't just Abu Ghraib. It's also Guantánamo Bay, still open for business after all these years, still causing blowback. In fact, the current president of the United States is a huge fan of Gitmo and has no plans to shut it down.
I just signed, prior to walking in, an order directing Secretary Mattis to keep open the detention facilities in Guantánamo Bay.
Yet there's still so much denial on the part of so many about what torture in such places actually achieved.
We did the right thing for the right reason. And the right reason was to protect the homeland and to protect American lives.
Absolute BS. As former FBI Special Agent Ali Soufan, an expert both on Al-Qaeda and on interrogation techniques, said to me on my Al Jazeera show on the subject of US torture,
it did not prevent one single terrorist attack in the United States. It damages our national security. It risked our national interest. We put people in orange suits, and now Al-Qaeda and ISIS put innocent people that they kidnapped in orange suits.
Yep, we do it, they do it. So much for saving lives. Let me leave you with the words of US Air Force officer Matthew Alexander, who was in charge of an interrogation team in Iraq. This is what he said about Guantánamo Bay. The longer it stays open, the more cost it will have in US lives. I think you might call that the very definition of blowback.